Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Hess, the Chief Revenue Officer of DFM Data Corporation. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to moderate this webinar on ISO 8000, the global standard for data quality and enterprise master data, and its application to digital transformation and a smarter supply chain. DFM Data Corporation and the Electronic Commerce Code Management Association have been working together for some time on the issues we are about to see. We have reserved 15 minutes at the end for questions. At the bottom of the screen, please use the Q&A function to submit a question. With that, I'm delighted to introduce you all to Peter Benson, the Executive Director of ECCMA, and Haley Thompson, ECCMA's Standards and Administrative Director, who will introduce us to ISO 8000. Take it away, Peter.
Thank you, John, and thank you everybody for taking time out of your busy schedule today. We're going to go through quite a bit of a journey here, looking at some of the ISO standards and how they impact digital transformation supply chain. But the whole idea of the presentation today is not just to introduce you to the subject, but I'm going to end with some basic actions you can take yourselves immediately and within your company to take advantage of these standards. And they are, without any doubt, changing the infrastructure of how we trade and how we work. Let me just go through them. And as John says, we're going to leave some time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions, let's try to keep them till the end. Okay, we're talking about the smart supply chain, and something that you've heard about is how we're all trying to realign some of the smart chains. And in the way we look at supply chain today, it probably isn't as smart as we would hope. We have ships standing off Los Angeles. We have blockages in all of our supply chains. And almost every second word you hear, particularly from the political field, in terms of what is to blame for the current state of our affairs, it all comes down to, you guessed it, the supply chain. Well, when we talk about a smart supply chain, as definition, we're talking about a digitally interoperable. Basically, that means that one system can meaningfully exchange data with another. Typically, we want to make sure the data is unambiguous. And it's a federated ecosystem. By federated, we mean that these organizations work together, but internally they're autonomous. They work together because they see benefit in working together, but they run their own businesses internally themselves. The whole idea of a supply chain is to plan, source, transform, and deliver products and services. I also work, as you'll hear, with the standards to do with industrial data, and there's a lot of work in the manufacturing sector around the world and try to come up with smart manufacturing. How do we create things in a smart fashion? How do we do it faster, better, safer, and cheaper? But I like to make sure everybody understands when they focus on smart manufacturing, and these are typically engineers, that you're not going to be able to do anything without a supply chain that supports you. Because your supply chain basically brings the goods to you, takes the goods away from you. Without a smart supply chain, you're never going to get to smart manufacturing. So there's a lot of effort put into smart manufacturing, less of an effort in smart supply chain, although that is changing at the moment. So let me talk about standards a little bit and why they are important and where they fit. It's a very simple pyramid. At the very top, we have laws. These are mandatory. Governments pass laws that we are expected to obey. And if we do not, then we face the consequences, typically fines, or if you're an individual, you end up in prison. Not very nice. Those are mandatory. We need to pay attention to them. At the very bottom, we have best practices. Large companies and companies that are trading partners evolve these best practices, typically methodologies that they adopt within their ecosystem, actually, of how they want to work together. And then occasionally, actually more frequently you would think, these best practices get elevated to standards. Standards sit in the middle between laws and best practices. Standards are, we tend to think of them voluntary, yet they're not really voluntary. If you design a light bulb and you don't comply with the standards for light bulb fixtures, or you design a plug that doesn't comply with the standards for sockets, you're not going to get very far. So they are they're basically agreement between industry, agreement between individuals. This is how we want to work together. But what's most important with standards is that they are contractual requirements. They can be verified independently by third parties. Example I use for that is we all use these USB sticks. We plug them into our computer or into our phone. And let's say you ordered 100,000 of them because you're in the business of supplying USBs. You plug them into your computer, you test a few dozens of them, and they don't work. Now you're going to pick up the phone and pretty quickly you call the supplier and say, you know what? Those USBs you sent me, they don't work. All right, give me my money back. I'll ship you back. No, wait a minute. They work fine. Now you have a problem. They claim they work. You claim they don't work. Well, USB is a standard. So the whole idea behind that is you go to a third party. Can you please test that these devices either work or don't work? So the real advantage of standards is you can bring in third parties to verify and validate that you are compliant with a standard. And standards are written to be included in contracts. Contracts refer to standards that you are going to ship me, and sometimes it's implied in the language. You're going to ship me a USB. Well, it's implied that it's compliant with the USB standard. So standards are really important. They sit in that middle ground between laws that are mandatory and best practices, but sometimes they're not as voluntary as we'd like to believe. Lots of standards organizations, there's a term horses for courses. You pick the right horse for the right course. And there's a structure in standards organizations at the highest level. We have the international standards organizations, which are based on country membership. Only countries can vote, one vote per country normally. At least that's the case in ISO and IEC, not all that familiar with ITU. And then below that, we have other international standards organizations that drive a lot of these standards across borders, but their membership is typically open. Corporations belong to those organizations, and you get the consensus amongst the participants. Now, at the ISO level, at the highest level, consensus is at the country level. It's very hard to achieve, by the way. There's always somebody who disagrees with what you come up with, and it's always a challenge. So you have to be very careful how to build consensus. It's a political system, and it's a very interesting process. Then you have regional standards, and you have national standards bodies like ANSI and British. Every country has a national standards body. Some have more than one. We actually have NIST, which is National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is a secondary standards body in the United States. And then finally, we have the Standards Development Organization. There are literally thousands of those. A lot of industry standards organizations, a lot of associations, and of course, ECCMA is one of those. We are a standards development organization. We have a liaison with ISO, so Special Liaison A, which allows us to submit new standards and to participate in standards development. So we are to take the work that we do and our members do, and we elevate that into an ISO standard. And I'll show you some of that, how that works. The two groups that we work with the most closely inside ISO is the ISO Technical Committee 184. Its title is Automation Systems and Integration, and it's split into subcommittees. There's two subcommittees we work closely with, 4 and 5. 4 is industrial data, and 5 is interoperability and integration for system automation. Under subcommittee 4, we've been developing the standards for the exchange of master data and data quality. And under SC5, we recently formed a new working group dealing with supply chain, and the first standard that's coming out is supply chain terminology. If you want to participate in ISO, you can. Any individual, any organization can participate in ISO, and you do that through your national standards body. You do that through what's called a technical advisor group. So in the United States, there's a technical advisors group for TC 184 SC4, and there's another technical advisors group for TC 184 SC5. So you apply to join those technical advisors groups, you become a member of those groups, and then you participate in the ballots and the reviews and ballot comments. ECCMA is actually the ANSI appointed administrator for those two technical advisors group. So anybody in the United States who wants to participate in ISO standards for industrial data or for supply chain would simply apply to ECCMA, and we process your registration with ISO, which gives you access to a lot of resources, a lot of documents and terminology, and standard development tools inside ISO. It's an interesting process, and it's something you should be aware of and should pay attention to. It's a very, very good way to keep abreast of what these new standards are and to talk to experts around the world and how they're being applied. Well, what ECCMA does, we were actually formed in 1999. Like 2 slides on what we do, but basically we provide, we're not for profit, we're owned by our members. We don't have shareholders, we have members. If you join ECCMA, you become a member of ECCMA and you become an owner of ECCMA. And as I said, we're a standards development organization recognized by ANSI, recognized by ISO. Essentially what we do is provide our members with digital supply chain solutions, data governance, data quality training. We run courses and webinars like this one. We run training courses, but we also provide back office master data quality control. We do master data quality audits. We actually provide a public data dictionary. We provide some shared organization masters, shared material masters that help people reduce the cost of onboarding their suppliers, onboarding their customers, and also onboarding materials or services into their ERP systems. And we do research for dictionaries and taxonomies and classifications. We're quite busy. Some of the things that we've been focusing on last probably 5 or 6 years as we focused our energy on the supply chain is on the fundamental concepts of the supply chain. Who, what, where, and when. And how do you identify and how do you describe those fundamental concepts is key to everything we actually do. And we have developed standards for all of them now. And of course, as you apply those standards, the accuracy of your communication in supply chain, the speed in which supply chain can operate increases dramatically. Of course, we do use techniques like blockchain, and we're talking about data governance as well. So the goal of what we try to do is we want to look for supply chain 2.0. It's flexible, it's resilient, there's minimal waste in the system, there's zero fraud, and it's sustainable. That's really probably a big goal, but you'd be surprised how quickly we're getting there. It's really quite enjoyable to see the number of companies that are restructuring their data, adding to their data, and improving the quality of their data. These are some of the standards we work with. I have put up there ISO 8601. It's the international standard for formatting date and time. The standard doesn't tell you anything else about date and time, except when you want to write it down, when you want to communicate with your trading partner, this is the date and time at which you want something to happen, write in the ISO format. Why is the ISO format important? Because, as we know, in the US, we typically write, the month, day, and year. And Europe writes it the other way around, right? It's the day, month, and year. Oh, that's pretty challenging. Typically, if if the days are above 12, you don't have a problem, because if it's the 16th of 06, you're pretty sure that the 16 is going to be a day. But if I give you 0707, right, you really don't know what I'm talking about, right? Or 0706, this is the 6th of July or the 7th of June. So formatting date and time is probably one of the simplest standards out there, and everybody can do it. You could write it on your checks, you could write it in your contracts. Every time you write the date, look at it. Why aren't you using the ISO format? So that's how I tend to distinguish those who are paying attention to standards and those who are not. I just look at the dates. The dates on forms, look at dates on letters, dates in contracts. If you see me write a date that's not an ISO format, it's probably I'm on a bad day. Now, other standards, international standards we've been working on, ISO 22745, is to do with open technical dictionaries. Open technical dictionaries are key to what we're doing. A dictionary contains metadata, the labels of your data, also the reference data, code lists. CA is the code for California. Well, Canada would disagree, and Computer Associates would disagree as well. So it's very important we have a dictionary where all of these concepts that we have, these labels are concepts, the codes are concepts, are all described in a dictionary, and that's called an open technical dictionary. We actually manage one of the world's largest, actually the world's largest open technical dictionary. It's a bit like Wikipedia, but really just focused on terminology and labels. ISO 8000 is the standard for data quality, information data quality, and particularly to do with 120 to do with provenance. It's actually very important how you handle where this data came from. And we're not talking about the provenance of a file or a record in a database. We're talking about the individual data elements, right? The atomic data elements inside that data. We need to label those to know where they came from. And I'm going to be talking a bit more about formatting identifiers, why that's really important. And really, really critical is the formatting of authoritative legal entity identifiers. I'll give you some examples of why that's so important. And we have some draft international standards that going through the ballot process, the voting process, we have to get consensus of all countries. 117 is for blockchains and secure links to off-chain data. At the moment, we have to find a way to make France happy. And then formatting of data governance policies, we have to make both France and Japan happy. They both objected to a couple of the comments or suggested that we improve it in a certain way. That's always the way the process works. The participants in standards development, it's not so much about saying, no, I don't like this. You have to propose a solution saying, I don't like this, but I would prefer if you did it this way. A very important standard that's out for review at the moment is ISO 8001:14, which is portable data. And I'm going to talk about two other standards today that are in committee review, and they're going to start working their way through the standards process. One is the natural location identifiers, and the other is the transport unit identifiers. Both amazing standards in what they can do. I'm going to give you a couple of case studies to demonstrate why these standards are important and how they're used in commerce. So here's an example of using ISO 8001:16, which is the ALEI, Authoritative Legal Entity Identifier. Now, ISO 8001:16 tells us that all governments around the world and all of the jurisdictions are the actual creators of legal entities. They keep databases. So if we simply put a prefix in front of the number, we can arrive at a unique identifier for all organizations around the world in a way that we can verify. We can verify the legal name. We can verify the date of birth. Now, for a company, the date of birth is called the date of formation. But just as when you go, to present at a hospital or any other place where it needs to verify who you are, a bank, they're going to ask you two things. What is your name and what is your date of birth? Those are the two data points they start with to validate who you are. Well, organizations, companies have those same data points. They have a legal name and they have date of birth, which is date of formation. So what we do is we took 24,000 suppliers in 81 countries and we researched, and it can be done very quickly, their authoritative legal entity identifier. So we verified 17,000 in 33 countries. What did we find? Well, first of all, the fact that we were unable to verify the legal entity of 7,000 companies was pretty disturbing to the CFO. 29% of their active suppliers, there was not enough information in their database to positively identify who these suppliers really were. That's an interesting thing to think about. Your CFO, that would probably be pretty disturbing. Okay, of the 17,000 that we were able to identify, 41% were duplicate records. So they weren't actually trading with 17,000 suppliers. They were only trading with 10,000. Well, think of the consequence of that. In this case, we call it dialing for dollars. They realize they're buying the same product from the same supplier under two different names. Oh, did I forget to mention at two different prices? It was simply a phone call, say, hey, Joe, I'm seeing some invoices here. from your company under a different name, and we paid more than you charged us on this other contract. How about sending us a check? You think these numbers are just, not typical. I can tell you they're absolutely typical. We do regular analysis, regular audits of supplier data. These numbers seem to hold true. Essentially, around 30% of the suppliers are not sufficiently identified for you to really know who they are. And of those you'd be able to identify, just under half are duplicate records. This is money laying on the table. And if you're able to clean this up, and we tend to help our members do it very quickly, difference is very rapid and very significant. This is another application of an ISO standard. The problem here is to do with the material master or service master, the same thing. Most companies that have a material master, they are adding data into the system. They're onboarding materials, right? So they're adding into ERP system, whether it be SAP or Oracle or Microsoft Dynamics or IBM or Infor. They're putting this data in their system so they can order, so they can track purchase orders, so they can track asset management inside the organization. Well, they're so badly described that they're not being able to order efficiently using their master data. What typically happens is in most of these systems, you could order a material in free text. I looked for it, couldn't find it. I just typed something in so I can order it, get a purchase order out the door. And then what happens, it comes in, I have another item in inventory, and my inventory doubles in size. Well, what they do is they hire these third parties to do data cleansing or cataloging or codification, call it whatever you want. And it costs a lot of money. I mean, I'm talking typically around, when the US government was doing it for the Defense Department, it was about $40 an item to catalog it. We were able to get that down to around $5, still too expensive. Because what you're seeing here, if you look at those lines, it's very common for a customer to pay somebody to clean the same data over and over and over again. There must be a better solution to that. Well, there is. What we came up with, ISO 800114, which is portable data. It's called structured data formats. A very easy structure for manufacturing suppliers to adopt. Instead of being PDF, it's SDF. It's a standard specification. We're not telling them what to say about the item, just the formatting of it. Well, once that is formatted, that data can be onboarded and absorbed directly into the ERP systems. Now it's manipulated. Different customers use different descriptions, but they're able to manipulate the same data, the same specification to be able to analyze it. And the advantage, of course, is the ability to analyze different materials is very, very fast because the computer can assess that these are the same materials. So data cleansing, deduplication, all that tends to go away. So it's early days yet. ISO 800114 is still being worked on. There is an older standard that is being used to do this, is ISO 22745 Part 40, which is the standard that's been used for the last probably 8 or 9 years. So 114 is simply a modern version of it. Okay, now, a cornerstone of everything we do are these identifiers, where it's your driver's license, your car registration number, your social security number, your passport number, your telephone number is an identifier. All of these identifiers float around in our systems. And typically in our computer systems, we have two fields. One field names what the data represents. This is a driver's license number, and we have a driver's license. This is a social security number, and we have a number. This is a tax ID number, and we have a number. Well, there's a short form, right? What we do is we simply put the prefix in front. So if this is a purchase order issued by Corning, we put Corning in front of their number. If this is a stock number by NATO, we put NATO in front of it. If this is a Grainger part number, we put Grainger's name in front of it. If it's a Swagelok, we put Swagelok in front of it. And if it's a standard issued by ASTM, we put ASTM in front. I know it sounds really simple because it really is. But when you create references in this format, what tends to happen, computers can handle it so much faster, And it's so much easier to do comparisons. In fact, literally less than 30 days after we produced the first draft of ISO 8115, Google, Yahoo, and Bing adopted it. So if you go into Google, Yahoo, and Bing and you type in Granger :1WPL7, you're going to get a much faster response than if you just typed in Granger space or Granger part number or just 1WPL7. So what you get back is more accurate search results, and you get them back faster. Why? Simple adoption of a formatting standard, of an ISO formatting standard. And by the way, nobody has to pay for it. Nobody's asking you to pay money to be able to format your data correctly. Now, another issue arose, and this is going to be important to what you're looking at, is to do with location. We think about postal addresses and we think about locations, but postal addresses are not sufficient these days for the purpose of end-to-end logistics. Now, I live out in the country, which is a challenge in its own right, not just for me, but for the mail service to deliver my mail. But if I want things delivered to my house, it could be the front gate, the back gate, the front door, the back door. There's lots of devices on my property that I may want to direct you to. This is where you fill my tank with gas, right? This is where you dump the wood. All the different places on my property, I want to communicate that to the people I work with to say, this is where I want something delivered. Think of loading docks, right? If I send you to a postal address of a warehouse, especially here in Pennsylvania, we have these warehouses that are literally half a mile long, right? They have 200 loading docks. So what happens? The truck gets to the gate, right? And now he's got to find directions to the loading dock and look up, what loading dock am I looking for? Well, if you include the NLI in the document, I can go exactly there. Now, we didn't invent this. This is not something that's special, a great idea. We'll go look at an airport. If you look at an airport as you board a plane and you can see through the cockpit, that's any time they leave the door open. If you look on the wall ahead of the pilots, you're going to see a line and you're going to see longitude and latitude. That's the gate address. Pilots don't care about its gate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at an airport. They only care about that longitude and latitude on the wall. Now, typically in the old days, they use that to calibrate the equipment, but that is how every gate in the world is described. So if you're in France or Paris or Geneva or anywhere else in the world, the gate number is using longitude and latitude. So we simply adopted that same principle, and we were a little bit tired with the ones and the I's and O's and zeros, so we were able to remove those and create a very simple logarithm to create an NLI. Really simple, really easy. And this is a result. This is a very simple, there's an application we use called ENLI. And essentially it simply converts longitude, latitude, floor if you're inside a building, and elevation if you're on the outside, into a very simple 14-digit code. Just couldn't get simpler than that. But most of your ISO standards are like that. They're very, very simple principles, which it doesn't matter what you adopt as a principle as long as everybody agrees to it. So that may not be the best solution, but it's a solution that everybody's agreed to. There's no cost to implementing it, and it's very simple to do. So this is your NLI, very simple way of converting a physical location. GPS gives us the actual footprint on the ground, and then we need floor or elevation. Elevation is actually on the outside of the building. It may be an asset, a piece of equipment that's up on a pole, so I want to know where it is. But the other side, if I'm inside a building, I want to know which floor you're on. Now, there's lots of debate during the standards development. It's still ongoing. How you decide what is the floor? Well, the answer is really simple, and like most ISO standards, it's very simplistic. It's whatever it says in the elevator. So yes, in Europe, they tend to call the ground floor 1. Here in the United States, we call it 0. Doesn't matter. Remember, this is simply an instruction to somebody of where to go. And how it's labeled in the elevator is a pretty good way to go. So floors, whatever it says in the building, if I go to the front desk and I say, where's the second floor? And they tell me, I'm good to go. So it's a very simple system, and that's the basis of most standards. Is very simple. It's simply formatting. Now, this is a new one we've been working on. It's a very interesting standard. This is to do with the DFM Data. We're one of the sponsors of the standard. It's to do with the transport unit identifier. Now, I have to think about why they need this. I'm going to show you why they need it and the actual consequence of using the transport unit identifier. But first of all, how do we create a transport unit identifier? Well, there's a couple things we know. Well, we're going to put ISO TUID in front. Well, that complies with ISO 8015. Now we have to know the prefix in front. That's easy. Then, of course, it would be nice to know the date and time in ISO format. That's pretty easy as well. And then we're going to need the origin and destination. So transport unit is something that's going to go from A to B. I need you to tell me what A is and what B is. And of course, we're using the NLI to do that. Then we have what's called a GPM stage. This is a good movement process stage. If you, in the transport industry, goods start when I actually put forward a request to a marketplace. I'm looking for a carrier. All right, that's a certain stage. In fact, that is stage 20. I'm looking for a carrier. When I found a carrier, it changes its stage. When the carrier picks up the goods and they have them in transit, that's a different stage. When they deliver the goods to the final destination, that's another stage. And when they've been accepted and an invoice is being created, that's their final stage. So we actually set it to 20. 20 is the default stage, because I'll show you how this is actually being used today. And of course, we need to know who the company is who is responsible for issuing the order to ship these goods. And that's typically done through a purchase order. Somebody has raised a purchase order, and they said, I want to send these goods from A to B, and I'm prepared to pay for it. I'm the legal party prepared to pay for it. So again, we're using the ISO format for that purchase order. The prefix tells us the legal identity of the issuer of the purchase order. So it's really straightforward, very simple. Again, remember, the whole basis behind ISO standards is we want to agree on a format so we can all do it the same way and all come to the same results. This is why this new standard is being developed. Turns out that the marketplace, the digital freight marketplaces, are no different from your personal marketplaces. Here in the US, we use Facebook Marketplace. You may have come across that. You may use Craigslist. And if you're trying to sell something, you would place it on the marketplace and place it on Craigslist. And you monitor them to see which one, if there's any buyers for what you're selling. And all of a sudden you find a buyer. That's great. I found a buyer, contacted me on Facebook. We agreed a price. We're in good shape. Oops, I forgot to remove it from Craigslist. So everybody looking at Craigslist is looking at this phantom offer to sell. Now in the transport industry, we call them phantom loads. I'm a manufacturer and I'm looking for the best price to move goods from A to B. Well, I create a instruction, movement of goods A to B. There's a little bit more data to it, but there's some of the basics of it. And I put that out on different digital freight marketplaces, typically 4 or 5. And then I'm going to accept the bid from one of the carriers. When I accept the bid from the carrier, I go ahead. I cement the deal. All right, carrier is going to take the goods, going to ship it. They go on. Tracking is not a problem. If you look at tracking in our friends at FedEx and UPS and others for our personal packages arrive, tracking is not a problem when they've got it. But the negotiation phase, where I haven't yet decided on who the carrier is going to be, that's my problem. Because if I put this on multiple marketplaces and I agree on one marketplace to a match, I need to go back and remove it from all the others. I don't do it. They'll take care of themselves. Well, that causes all of these phantom loads to build up in all these marketplaces. And as far as the carrier is concerned, they go looking at a marketplace. It doesn't take them very long to realize this is a waste of my time. Right? Half of these loads are not real. So I'm bidding against I'm doing all this work bidding against all these loads. Half of them are not real. That's demoralizing. That's, come on, it's a waste of time. On the other, so the digital freight marketplace is saying that we really want to clear this up, but we don't want to tell each other who our customers are. God forbid they poach them, right? Well, it never happens. Of course it happens. So how do we do this in an anonymous way? How do we purge this data from these different systems in an anonymous way? That's where the TUID comes in. If you add the TUID to a system, and it's very simple, right? The TUID goes into all the loads. So every time I start the process, I create a TUID. Well, because it has the same TUID, it's very easy to go across all these marketplaces and purge all the data that's no longer relevant. Now, if you think about the consequence of that, when almost 40% of a digital freight marketplace is phantom loads. So you're trying to do business and 40% of what's out there is garbage, right? Doesn't really exist. Now, that changes on the time of day. In the early parts of the morning, it tends to be less of the phantom loads. By the time it gets the afternoon, there's tons of phantom loads. But so this whole thing drags down. It drags down the efficiencies of these marketplaces and stops them operating as the best they could. And the solution is really simple. It's all they have to do is agree to use a standard format to identify these loads. And that's where that TUID comes in. So this technology, the ISO standards and standards in general, what do? They allow us to develop high performance systems and diverse systems. One of the standards I like the best is the geographic information. The weather information is another one. Well, you may use different weather apps. There's lots of weather apps out there, right? All using the same fundamental data. But that data is formatted in a standard format. Same thing for GPS data. A little bit more unreliable because there's many ways to represent GPS data. So basically, here's another example of how an ISO standard can help us streamline this process. So what we do at ECCMA is we help organizations like DFM Data. They tell us what their problem is. They explain to us how they want to move forward with this, and we take it to the international community, International Standards Committee. We propose it to them as a new project, and we shepherd it through the voting process. And different countries will make changes to it, but typically when you get down to this level of where we are today, they become quite stable. So it's a really great way to make incremental changes to our supply chain by driving out the data errors, driving out this data duplication that exists in the system. So I want you to think about what you can do. I want you to think about why this is important, and you've taken the time to listen to me, which is great. But let's go through a couple of things you can do today. The first thing is use the ISO format for date. Right? Year, actually it's really century, because the 20 is the century. So it's 2022, 06, 23. It is really not hard. Great advantage of that date, by the way, is that you can sort it easily. Right? It sorts beautifully. Use it in the naming of your files. If you're trying to find a way to keep track of your files, use the ISO date format. It's really simple to do. If you're writing contracts, if you're writing any document, if you're writing your checks, for example, not many people use checks anymore, but God forbid you're still using them. There's security risk associated with it, writing a check, but assuming you write them occasionally, you can write the date versus date, write it in the ISO format. It's been accepted by all the banks in the US, all the banks internationally for over 10 years. So don't be slow in using it. And every time you write the date in a non-ISO format, ask yourself the question, why? Are you going to be part of the solution or part of the problem? Now, date was easy one. Next one is not so hard either. Use the ISO 8000's 116 ALEI. Use it in your signature block, use it in your contracts, right? So when you write a contract, right, when you refer to your company's name, use your full legal name. Legal name is the name of your registration when you were formed as a company. Now, you may know us as ECCMA, ECCMA. Turns out our legal name is Code Management Association. So you can have Code Management Association doing business as ECCMA, that's fine. But in all cases, you want to put your ALEI. Now, our ALEI for ECCMA, Code Management Association, is US-DE for Delaware, Business Entity Register, colon, 3031657. Why is that important? Because anybody can go to the state of Delaware's website, type in that number, and they're going to get our record of Code Management Association. And you'll see our legal name and our date of formation, as well as status or other data the different states make available. This applies not just the United States, it applies to every country in the world. Right? So if you're doing business in India, your business in Australia, and different countries and different jurisdictions give you more or less data, but all of them will allow you to verify the legal name and date of formation. Now, we actually have a rogues gallery of those who don't provide as much information as we'd like. We have those who are really stars. Australia is great. If you go to an Australian company and you look up their ALEI, you'll get a ton of information from the directors, all the data is being verified and up to date. Go to California and you get pretty much the same data. So the ALEI is the authoritative legal entity identifier. Everyone has one. Every organization has one. Right? All you have to do is look it up. And what I'd like you to do is put it in your signature block, following your name. Always use your ALEI. In fact, we were talking with the Uniform Code Commission or Council, whatever they're called, and they're looking at making it as a common recommendation to the legal practices here in the United States that they should always format names of parties to contracts in this way. Okay, now you know yours. That was really simple. Next, ask your trading partners for their ALEI. You're going to find it's going to help you more than you ever could have imagined. Your supplier master, ask your suppliers, your vendors for their ALEI and their legal name, their date of formation. And you have to verify it. Asking them for it is not enough. You have to go and verify that it's correct. Now, we actually have a service for that for our members where we actually run those verification processes. We have a team of people, about 20 people, that do these verifications all the time, but it's very inexpensive. It's something you can do very quickly. We actually do the verification not once, we do it every 6 months, because in some cases, rare cases, but it does happen, companies either don't comply with their local state regulations, they get delisted, there's mergers and acquisitions or name changes, and those things we like to keep on top of. So as far as your trading partners are concerned, ask them for the ALEI, and if you have a supplier master or vendor master, if you want us to look at it, we can go through and help you get those as a batch process. Every time you onboard a new supplier or onboard a new customer, ask them for their ALEI, their legal name, their date of formation, and then go and check it. Okay? Now, that was 3, not so hard. 4 is the NLI. Now, you have address databases, right, in your system, in your supplier master. I'm sure you have addresses. Many places in your organization, you use addresses, and the addresses are typically, it's a name, it's a building number, it's a street address, it's a city, state, zip, or country and postcode. Add another field. Add the NLI as a field. Now, there are lots of systems out there that you can use, right, that will do geocoding. Geocoding is automatically taking a postal address and converting it to the longitude and latitude. Now, we have a product called the e-nli.org. It's a very simple, it's a free website you can go to. And if you put in a postal address, it accesses the geocoding database of the post offices around the world, and it comes back with the NLI. So it's a very, very simple process. Or as an alternative, again, you can send a file to ECCMA. There's a nominal charge for that, but we will automatically geocode a large number of addresses. But to start with, you need to add the field to your name and address. So just after the postcode, you have, name, street address, city, state, zip, country, NLI. Not hard to do. Okay. And what you're talking about NLI, yes, do the addresses, of course, but think about going one step further. If you're in the logistics business, you can ask your trading partners for the NLI for very specific locations, a specific loading dock, right? An office location. That will make it so much more efficient when you get to the destination. Last one on the list is the smart prefix. Smart prefix is the piece that goes in front of your part numbers, your serial numbers, your asset numbers, your PO numbers, your invoice numbers, to tell us who issued that number. So you want to add your smart prefix, right? Basically, you can get a smart prefix from your customers, you can get a smart prefix from your suppliers, you can get your smart prefix. It's not hard to get one. ECCMA will provide it to you if you don't have one. Very simple to get your smart prefix. The difference, though, is that smart prefix is like a domain name. It's unique across the world. So it's very important, if you want a branded smart prefix, you apply for it as soon as possible. Otherwise, you're going to find, like GM and General Motors, there's a little bit of a, like General Mills and General Motors, a little bit of disagreement who got GM. The answer was whoever got there first. So remember, smart prefixes are like domain names. In fact, we call the smart prefix system the industrial domain name. It's something, if you want to have a branded prefix, you may want to apply as early as you can. Now, you can register it, in a very special way. There's an annual fee like domains where you register a smart prefix. What that does, it means that you can automate how people use it. So it's very much like a domain name, in fact, very similar, where you can put your web server address and associate that with your domain name. And you can also put a mail server address with your domain name. In this case, you can put up to 4 addresses where you want people to verify the actual identifier. So let's say you had a part number and you have a prefix in front of it, like let's say Corning or SKF. I have a part number, but they can direct traffic. They can direct their customers to a specific website or specific IP address to resolve that number, to verify that number. Also, they can get information in terms of who's looking at that number, very much like LinkedIn. If you pay your subscription to LinkedIn, you can see who's looking at your profile. You can get other statistics. Same thing, Classmate does the same thing. So if you want statistics about who's using your smart prefix and who's looking it up, basically you need to register it. In the absence of real registration, it just points to your AOEI. So there you go. You've got 6 things I would recommend, 5 of which are free. It's a pretty good load, right? You can go through the whole process. And if you can't do one, you probably won't do the others, but please take the time. 1, 2, 3, and 4 should be very simple. 5, you may need to talk to us to help you, or talk to DFM Data. At the bottom of the screen, you have a reference to John Hess at dfmdata.com. He can help you get your smart prefix if you don't have it. Okay, thank you. Thank you immensely for attending our webinar today. We have 2 webinars coming up, one more this month. This Friday, there's another one specifically on location identifiers. So if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the background behind the ISO standard, ISO 8001:18, natural location identifiers, and how they're formatted and how they're built, then I would recommend you join us on that webinar. And then there are 2 webinars next month on the path of visibility and clean data. Those are sponsored by DFM Data. One's on July 2nd and one's July 14th. And again, please register for those. Thank you. John, over to you.
Peter, thank you for an excellent informative presentation. You know, we at DFM Data have appreciated the opportunity to collaborate with ECCMA on supply chain interoperability and connectivity standards, and we're looking forward to continuing our work together in the future. We have 3 questions in the Q&A. If you all have questions, please post them there. Peter, can you see them?
Yes, I can. Let me take them. They're pretty straightforward. Have you thought about facing the building in terms of emergency services, fire department? Absolutely. In fact, one of the purposes of the NLI is because it has floor, you can actually get an NLI, natural location identifier, for every door in a house, right? So again, it's part of the, it's the taking GPS one step further to find out, you know, where you want to go. Now, there have been discussions with emergency services to be able to allow people to label certain rooms in their house, for example, where there are children or pets. There are some issues of privacy and confidentiality of how you want to do that, but sometimes it helps to be able to, for a emergency services, to be able to know right away that what they're looking at. So this is the first time they can see inside a building and allow the owner to have a file to be able to tell them what's behind every door. These are my priority doors. These are things you want to look at. So yes, that has already been thought of. That's what the emergency service is looking at, is how do we do it in such a way that, and particularly when a caller calls, that may be the time to do it, that there's a fire, there's a problem. Let me send you the map of my building, particularly what the NLI will tell them is what's behind the doors. This is where the children are. This is areas of the house. The other one somebody's asked about to do with the smart prefix, right? Registering a smart prefix is $500 a year. It's a bit like DNS. It's the same principle as DNS. And what's important is that there's no duplication in the system. So it's $500 a year at the moment to register a smart prefix. There are sub prefixes as well. You can register. I'm not sure the cost of registering sub prefixes. Remember, you only need one. Your prefix covers you for not just all your part numbers and service, service goods you sell as well, but your invoice numbers, PO numbers, whatever identifier, whatever number you issue inside your organization, that prefix goes in front. So it covers everything that you could want to communicate to third parties. Somebody asked a question about how ALEI designations are linked together for companies with multiple entities. That's actually an excellent question. We actually have a data model we're happy to share that shows once you have an ALEI for these are legal entities. These are independent legal entities. In the ISO law, these two organizations are independent. Now, they may be connected. One may own more than 50% of the shares in the other. That's only one type of relationship, but there's many relationships. In the Middle East, we use a relationship of authorized distributor because there are rules and regulations about being able to buy goods, imported goods. You can only buy them from an authorized distributor. So they need to know that the relationship between the supplier, the manufacturer, and the local supplier, they're authorized dealers. So it's not just ownership of a relationship, we're looking at much a wider range of relationships, and the ALAI allows us very easily to map relationships. So we use, and is there a directory? Not a public directory that we know at the moment, although we understand some countries are working on directories of relationships, and the ALAI is what's being used to track that. Australia may be the first one to produce a public relationship directory, including links to all the principals in an organization. I've got another question here. Warehouse to warehouse transfer or is this shared by multiple businesses, lying on prefix or internal PO, correct? Right? Again, warehouse to warehouse transfer, it's the same thing. It's NLI to NLI. Even if it's the same prefix, doesn't make any difference. If you look at those data elements on the NLI, right, you have the origin and destination and the date and time. That even if it's the same organization, I'm just shipping it for myself from one to another. I'm still going to use an outside carrier. Therefore, I'm going to need a TUID. So I hope that answers the questions. I don't know if there's anything else, John, that I've missed, or if you or any of your colleagues at DFM Data would like to add something or ask some questions that relate to this.
I think you've mostly covered it. I can't think of anything that you've left out. There was a question in the chat about the upcoming webinars. If you've attended this one, we will certainly invite you to attend the upcoming webinars, particularly the follow-ons in July. But if you would like a link, you can email me directly or Peter for the upcoming ECCMA webinar, and we will make sure that you have the proper registration link. Otherwise, I'll leave it open for a minute here for other questions or comments.
Yeah, so again, the ECCMA ones are published on the ECCMA website. Go to ECCMA.org. It's pretty easy to locate the next webinars. There is a whole collection of all of our past webinars get recorded. So you can download recordings if you're not able to attend the webinar. And there's also a whole collection of white papers as well. One of the things you may want to consider, we manage a number of LinkedIn groups designed to solicit comment on how these standards are developed and some of the implementation best practices. And you may want to look at those as well.
Any other questions before we close the webinar?
Again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, John and Haley for your patience with this. And I hope many of you are able to attend our next webinars, and we look forward to seeing you.
Very good. Thank you all.